For 1,000 years had they fought and died, certain of the justice of their cause, only to be told that their holy war was born of the sins of their forefathers.
A small army of heretics has invaded the city, Your Eminence.
Very good. Grant our guests what time they need to sow a measure of chaos, then order the Temple Knights to crush them.
I wish to speak with you both in a place where privacy was assured. This is a temporary measure. It was never intended that the Lord Commander of the Temple Knights serve in this capacity indefinitely.
Heroes once celebrated as saviors of Eorzea, brought low through treachery, their names blackened with royal blood. And so they came, at a friend's behest.
All things must end, even bloodshed. However it happens, I have to win. Don't let your guard down!
Welcome to another video from me. This time we want to find out which is the best among those tanking jobs that keep this game, especially the Duty Finder, running. A little disclaimer here. The following statements are based on my own opinion and experience, so feel free to disagree or correct me if I'm wrong with any point. First of all, let me grant you an overall impression of each tank regarding its nature and playstyle, to grant you some aid in decision making which of them to choose for yourself. The Paladin, often referred to as shield tank, is an incredible versatile tank armed with shield and sword, as well as potential magic spells with which he can heal himself or others, or burst down enemies. He lacks a bit at potential AoE solutions, with less variation, and is relatively easy to play. His prime feature that distinguishes him from the other two is his heavy group support and utility, which makes him the best off tank and supporter of all tanks at the moment. His active blocks transpose the feeling of wearing sword and shield and transform him into a classical paladin as known from other games. The Warrior, also called the Blue DPS, is a heavy-hitting fellow with a great axe and an offensive tanking style. Instead of dealing consistent damage through dots or casts, he mainly squeezes out his damage in a 10-second bursting phase, crushing his enemies with heavy crit numbers. On the other hand, instead of lacking defensive abilities, he has a variation of solid damage mitigations for himself and a small shield for his group, as well as a potion-like heal inside of his tanking stance. That mentioned, his tanking stance don't reduces the incoming damage, but grants him more max HP and the heal he receives. His only downside is constantly holding up a damage boost, which always conveys the feeling of being delayed a bit before getting into action. Last but not least, the Blackest Knight, the Dark Knight, who is by far the fastest tank regarding its playstyle, in the shape of a vast access to off-global abilities with dark arts as its core. Above that, he is packed with plenty burst damage, which is also dealt very quickly and flexible as long as you have some MP remaining. While lacking utilities to protect the raid and having the worst cheat death ability, he has a great magical shield that grants you more damage potential when used correctly. Nevertheless, his best features surely are his unrivaled style and combat animations, and his superiority in dungeon handling with incredible AoE potential and flow. And so much for that little impression. Let us now divide all parts of the game into categories to achieve a simple and summarizing points award for each job. Let us begin with the thing all people are interested in: single target DPS. A praise for the devs should be made here, because those DPS numbers are really close, and regarding that you can easily choose any of the tanks with only little power differences. While having a much more forgiving rotation and flexibility against any form of mechanic, the Paladin and Dark Knight are somehow outmatched by a Warrior in general. And there may be some differences in other departments, at least inside of the field of DPS, I would rate the Paladin and Dark Knight as even match. Both are significantly stronger when you have a warrior tanking with them, or a ninja inside of their group for having a slashing debuff, and both of their potential, if used appropriately, can reach high values. According to this chart, the Dark Knight would overdo the Paladin, but in contrast to that, we have two Paladins on the tank DPS all-star podium, so I would definitely suggest a draw between them. But if you really want nothing else than to reach the DPS throne of tanking, then you should pick the warrior. Even when demanding some accurate timings and a perfect boss knowledge, you will generally outmatch the Paladin and the Dark Knight. This is mainly caused by your progressively increasing bursting windows that can be lined up with your raid, a heavy crit value and rising gear progression. The damage you pull out of your inner release sometimes even bursts away the one or the other DPS. So this point definitely goes to the warrior. Now let us put the Omega to its alpha, the survivability and utility. Starting with the Dark Knight, we have to take into consideration all of this phenomenal mitigation to magical and personal damage, where he performs at his best. If you have specific fights like Ultima Weapon Ultimate, he can be preferred over other tanks. On the other hand, he lacks group mitigation and, like I have mentioned before, has a poor cheat death ability. But the worst thing about it is that his self-healing potential is locked to his tanking stance, which detaches its worth for DPS-oriented tanks. Compared with that, the warrior has a much better raid mitigation, with his Shake It Off ability shielding the raid, and his cheat death ability Holmgang only has a 3-minute cooldown, making it a solid advantage of dodging heavy tank kills or mechanics. Above that, he has some self-healing potential with Storm's Eye and mainly Equilibrium, that is locked to the tanking stance as well, but the warrior can withstand a swap with the help of Unchained. But let us stop to beating around the bush. The undisputed master of utility and survivability is the Paladin. Not only through his active block with Sheltron, but for answers to every situation and mechanic, a great raid and personal mitigation, and also the best cheat death ability, in my opinion. His Hallowed Ground can even be used to simply avoid crucial mechanics, because in contrast to the ones from Dark Knight and Warrior, it treats the attack as if it did not happen at all, while also not pushing healers into panic mode. However, the thing that makes Paladin the king of utility is Clemency, one of the only two healing abilities that are not locked to healers. This can be used so flexible some cannot even imagine. And before you affront me now with using Clemency is definitely a DPS loss, healers have to adjust. In any situation where your Clemency stood between the death and life of any of your party, it absolutely is a DPS gain, for dead people can't deal any kind of damage. Another important ability every tank should be capable of is generating enmity. While all of this is roughly the same in tanking stance, the differences are drawn inside of the offensive playstyle and DPS stance, where the game has evolved to. Here, the Paladin really gets the short end of the deal. While Flash being good for pack pulling occasions, he really lacks a solid gap closer with increased enmity generation and loses large amounts of DPS when starting with the enmity combo. Somehow, the same applies to the Dark Knight as well. Even when having Plunge as a solid gap closer with increased enmity, he has to go for the enmity combo when not being assisted by the off-tank with Shirk. Nevertheless, since patch 4.4, his enmity combo can easily be flown into the opener, while not decreasing the damage output significantly. So I would prefer Dark Knight over the Paladin in this section. Anyway, the warrior takes the point here, because his possibility to open inside of his tanking stance without any sparks of DPS loss, due to Unchained. Above that, he also increases his profit even more with the help of his self-healing spell that increases his generated enmity enormously. Now, with therefore important traits explained, let us turn over to the professional progress or speed savage rating, the meta or tier list. The first thing that I would like to tell you is that all of your progression and the success you will have as a tank depends mostly on your ambition and the skill with the game and job you play. Never let yourself be limited to strict meta orders defined by general opinions. But for those who want to hear something about meta placement nonetheless, let us begin with the Dark Knight, who is generally put onto the third place. While being awesome at Ultima Weapon Ultimate, he lacks some potential in other fights, and especially in Speed Savage raiding. Here, he plainly is missing raid mitigation that is necessary to help DPS to stay in the saddle. Above that, his Walking Dead ability is a handicap compared to Hallowed Ground or Holmgang. But all in all, I would not really consider him inferior to the others, but opinions may also establish over time, and it's quite hard to get rid of those perceptions once made stable. So, you may experience the situation of being denied by a group when being the Dark Knight. On the other hand, we have the Paladin granting the best utility and defensive potential, but most people prefer the Warrior as top ranked tanking job at the moment, mainly because of the highest DPS and also his enmity superiority, making him the best main tank at the moment. Moving over to the more casual friendly and time effort relating section. Let us talk about sustainability and easiness, meaning each tank's difficulty to perform at a solid level and his frailty to any form of phase transition or rotation planning in general. Here the Dark Knight would be very awesome due to his combat system being summed up to the point: you got MP, you deal more damage with Dark Arts. But his fast-paced combat style and also some required boss knowledge for the correct use of his shield, the Blackest Knight, don't really portray him as beginner friendly, and even with decent boss knowledge I have experienced the one or another TBN running into the void. Another difficulty and transition frailty level is the Warrior. While his main tanking opener is a sweet advantage to the one from the others, a lot of theory crafting and decision making has to be made to execute everything correctly. Above that, your serious DPS is pulled out of a 10-second period, meaning that everything inside of it has to be lined up perfectly, with raid support, your own preparations, and the boss being present for that time. That all could be overwhelming for beginners, and even experienced players may be distracted at some point and smash in their inner release while the boss saying au revoir. So I would definitely recommend Paladin in this section. Even when having a rotation shift between magical and melee rotation, it somehow is easy to perform, and in the worst case, when failing at the Holy Spirit spam, you can easily continue with your melee rotation. Above that, the Paladin has self-explanatory utility and lots of defensives in general. So here the point goes to our Shining Knight. Another category worth to mention is the speed, easiness and comfort of clearing dungeons and dailies. While Paladin and Warrior are shining at 50 and 60 boss fights with a heavy personal DPS, I really favor the Dark Knight here, because of his brutal AoE DPS while also mitigating tons of damage with his shield. That again refers back into his offensive potential by granting blood points for more use of Quietus. That again grants him a lot of MP when hitting many targets, giving him the advantage of a Dark Arts Abyssal Drain, recalling tons of HP. The Warrior still comes up with quite heavy bursts in some pulls, but lacks damage in every pull where his cooldowns are not available. While the Paladin has a solid pace, he definitely lacks enmity generation, due to his main AoE spell Solar Eclipse being constructed without increased enmity, forcing him to either use flash oftenly or stay inside of his tanking stance. In contrast to that, the Dark Knight really flows and flies through a dungeon, and is also stable and good at low level content. So if you not already cleared a dungeon as a Dark Knight, try it out. Which directly brings us to another considerable point, the AoE potential and DPS. Don't let us talk where it is not necessary. The Warrior is the only effective competition to Dark Knight, but overall and over a dungeon duration of 15 to 20 minutes, where most of the AoE DPS potential is shown, the Dark Knight really outmatches him by far. Maybe on low level content the Paladin takes the lead, but that really should not be rated. The Dark Knight has a perfect AoE damage flow that not also gives him the most output on level 70, but also harmonizes with his defensive department perfectly. The last point, which I personally find mentionable, is the solo content potential. May it be for the personal success or achievements, or showing friends on how awesome you are. Or maybe filming it for YouTube content. However, while Dark Knight and Warrior may clear some old fights, and maybe some Heaven's Ward trials as well, the Paladin is the only job with a manageable self-heal that even lets you stand alone against Stormblood A ranks without a healer. Above that you have Hallowed Ground that sometimes can even avoid a dead certain mechanic that would otherwise stop you from fighting on. Therefore, if you want to clear old content for farming or artistic reasons, this decision easily is made and grants the Paladin another point. And that's it, guys. This little cutscene makes me think that I forgot one category. Ah, of course. The style. That is most important. The warrior has a giant axe, glowing red eyeballs inside of his inner release, and cries out with fierce lust for battle and glory. The paladin shines with embracing light and fights with honor and grace to wield the power of righteousness to a valorous victory. Ah, come on. This point goes to the Dark Knight, of course. What means we have a draw here. I know this may be constructed, but this list of categories and the result itself should emphasize on my irrefutable opinion that with joy, interest and motivation to learn, you can simply play all of these tanks and be great on your own behest. The balance of this game is really outstanding, and only in high-end comparison where pro gamers are fine-tuning every little detail, you will see the differences of those jobs. So my advice and the intention of this video shall enforce you to choose the tank you favor. I hope that my aforementioned categories can help you with this decision and that you benefit from this or other of my videos, and would be pleased about any form of support to my channel. Nice queuing times and see you in the next video. Until then, take care.
And who are you? The prowler said that I must bow so low. Only a cat of a different coat. It's all the truth I know.